Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a podcast for everyone today that we've been trying to put together for quite a while, haven't we, Landon?
We have, and this is a powerful episode.
Yeah, it is a powerful episode about a really difficult topic, but we had somebody that reached out to us that wanted to share his story. And we felt that this really needed to be heard by everyone. So on the episode today, we've prepared sort of some context for our guest story. And then we'll hear from our guests. We'll talk to him, and then we'll do kind of a wrap up. So that's kind of the format for today. So why don't we go to our first slide and we can just dive right in. As I said, this is a difficult topic that has been discussed before on multiple platforms very well. Mormonism Live has talked about it. Mormon Stories has talked about it. And we are going to be discussing the tragedy of electroshock therapy at BYU. We've mentioned this before on other podcasts, haven't we, Landon? Because we have touched on the topic.
Yeah, and I think everyone's heard about the electroshock therapy at BYU, and obviously President Oaks and him saying that he was not involved and it didn't happen on his watch has all been controversial over the years. But this is a little bit of a new angle, I think.
Yeah, I think it is because we kind of came across somebody who had a story with direct involvement in the scenario and someone that had not shared their story before. So we thought it was really important that we talk about it today. So just to give a little background, we're going to go through it a little bit. Again, as I said, there are other podcasts that are going to cover each part of the scenario way more in depth. But for the sake of being able to understand what our guest today is going to be talking about, we're just going to kind of go a little bit into the past and kind of get you up to speed about this scenario, taking you right to the point where our guest comes right in contact with this as a BYU student. So let's kind of go through our slides here. Okay, so the first slide is this our very first one?
Yep.
Yeah, there it is. Okay. Boy, I can't even remember my own slides. It's becoming a problem. So this is kind of a little timeline that I took off the USGA BYU. It's a BYU LGBTQ support group. And they have a really awesome timeline they've kind of put together of some of the pivotal events at BYU having to do with the LGBTQ community. So we can just, I'll read one and then you read another. And again, this is just to give context, because when we get to our guest, I honestly think you will not believe what you're hearing. I think looked like this the whole time we were talking to him. It was pretty intense. So starting back in 1957, President Wilkinson, and he was the president of BYU, the Wilkinson Center is named after him, where I spent many days. President Wilkinson suggested the inclusion of an LDS moral standards in the honor code. Up to that point, it had been an academic code. You'll be honest, you won't cheat. But in 1957, they decided to add more of a moral component to this.
Yeah. 62 to 65, the university and church leaders, including Wilkinson, Spencer W. Kimball, and Mark E. Peterson, deliver a series of homophobic speeches. 5 students commit suicide.
Yes, and I'm not surprised about some of those speeches. I was going to include some of them, but I thought, you know what, you guys can look those up. That's not necessarily where we're going to go here with this today. But yeah, it was a really rough era where they came out and said very blatantly that members of the LGBTQ community were not welcome at BYU. And again, unfortunately, it did result in 5 students committing suicide. And there are other podcasts about this that go into more detail. Also, in 1957, we're kind of jumping around a little bit. The BYU admin, the administration takes over the honor code and institutes their anti-LGBTQ policies. And that goes right along with then the rhetoric that you hear in the speeches given at, devotionals and meetings and things like that. It was just
so what started out as an honor code for academic honesty instituted by the students themselves, the administration takes over and then starts instituting LGBTQ policies and other moral policies that they start enforcing over the years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a good point to go back to 1948. That early is when the students started their own code to hold each other accountable academically. And then it just sort of twisted and morphed into what we have today, which we'll go more into that. So let's see what happened in 73 to 83, Landon.
73 to 83, BYU practices aversion therapy on homosexual students. And this is the time period that we're talking about where this electroshock therapy begins to happen.
Yep. And this is when our guest was at BYU, and he'll be sharing his experience. In 1976, President Oaks, and that would be President Oaks in the first presidency, he was president of BYU during this time period. He begins using surveillance, raids, and entrapment against suspected LGBTQ students. And I was at BYU in 1984, and I podcasted and spoke before about my own experiences with friends and that scenario.
Yeah, we'll cover a little bit more about this. I was just stunned as I saw the tactics that were employed by a Supreme Court justice of the state of Utah is implementing basically Nazi or North Korean tactics at BYU. It's scary.
It is
1977, the Payne Papers is anonymously published and sent to LDS church leaders by gay student Chloe Jenkins and gay instructor Lee Williams.
Right. So at that point, LGBTQ students are starting to, I would say, maybe band together, maybe organize, maybe try to make their voices heard amongst all of these, horrible homophobic statements that are being made by church leaders. They're trying to push back, although it's difficult given the climate there. In 1978, Boyd K. Packer of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles gives a speech calling homosexuality a curable problem. And we'll get into this a little later in the podcast, but that was kind of a mindset everywhere, that it was a sickness, an illness, perhaps a choice, that kind of rhetoric.
Okay, in 2005, the Foundation for Attraction Research is founded by BYU professors advocating for conversion therapy. And this is quite late, 2005. Everyone else has long abandoned this, and the church under Farr actually begins to advocate for this type of therapy.
Yeah. Well, President Holland himself has said that the church is always 20 years behind the rest of the world. He said that kind of proudly. In this situation with this particular subject, this doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. So just so that our viewers and listeners can understand what we're talking about, the question, what is gay conversion therapy? Because you hear that word on podcasts and things, but what is it exactly? We're going to just read this little definition here. It says, the term conversion therapy can refer to any type of effort to change or mitigate someone's sexual orientation, and is typically referred to in contemporary literature as SOCE, sexual orientation change efforts. From the 1950s through the mid-70s, homosexuality was classified in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a disorder. In this context, gay conversion therapy was a subject of research in various universities and hospitals in the US and UK that intended to find a way to treat or to cure homosexuality through various therapeutic techniques, including aversion therapy, hormonal therapy, and psychotherapeutic methods such as reparative therapy. So there's a difference between aversion therapy and conversion therapy. Conversion therapy. That's really funny, given that missionaries are always out to try to convert somebody. That's not exactly. So any thoughts on that? Gay conversion therapy.
Well, the bottom line is, conversion therapy is trying to change somebody's sexual orientation for them. You don't think it's appropriate, therefore you try to change them. And this was popular in the 1950s through the mid-70s in all psychology. So, what they were doing here was just maybe part of the times and doing what other researchers were doing. We know that the things they used to do to treat masturbation in women was horrible, and different things like that. So, the world has a history of taking things that they don't know about and trying to figure out how to solve them. But by the mid 70s, science had caught up and figured out that, this was not a problem or a defect. It was just the way some people are born and some people are wired. And that kind of changed in the mid 70s. But the church, as of 2005 at BYU, they're still trying these types of methods.
Exactly. That's exactly right. All right, let's go to our next slide. The question is conversion therapy still practiced? Because there are books, there are series, there are stories, there are guests on podcasts of people, teenagers that are sent to camps or sent for conversion therapy. There's a book, I'm thinking of the title right now. It was recommended for our book club. I can't remember, but all kinds of things like that. This scenario is not isolated. There are many vulnerable people who are put in these scenarios, and great damage is done. You'll see in the news just recently, somebody in Utah convicted. He was practicing, this 20 years ago, and now those teenagers that he was working with as adults have come back and said this was wrong. Look what happened. So it's just a horrific, horrific thing. Do you want to read this one, Landon?
Sure. Is conversion therapy still practiced? Utah has banned conversion therapy for minors. The ban went into effect in 2020 and applies to licensed clinicians. It prohibits therapists from subjecting youth to conversion therapy, which is a practice that aims to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. The ban adds conversion therapy to a list of unprofessional conduct for state licensed mental health therapists, and therapists who violate the ban may face suspension or revocation of their license. A total of 26 states, as well as the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and more than 100 municipalities have banned the practice.
So finally, Utah in 2020, and for minors, non-consenting minors. But again, it says licensed clinicians. And I've heard stories, there are many people that call themselves life coaches, or, people think they're a therapist, but they're not. Parents send youth sometimes to these kinds of scenarios. So I think it is still something that everybody needs to be aware of and, cognizant.
Well, it sounds like this could still go on at BYU today, because it's only for minors that it was banned. And so, anyone over the consenting age, it sounds like you could still possibly attempt this.
Yeah, I think that's true. But at least minors, at least there are some steps taken, but still, it's just horrifying. All right, let's move through. So I wanted to find out, let me see. So the question, of course, is, did this happen at BYU? And there's so much evidence that yes, it did. That's not even really a question anymore. Did it happen at BYU? So different apologetic sites have tried to kind of address it with the mindset, we know it happened, but let's explain exactly why and exactly what was happening. So this is Mormon R with the B.H. Roberts Foundation, and it does have some answers to the question, did BYU use electroshocks to try to change gay people? That was a question that somebody posed on their site. So their answer says yes, because they have to say yes, because there's no way to hide that it hasn't happened, because so many have come forward saying, I was a victim of this. So yes, gay aversion research utilizing electroshocks. Now that's a different way to say it, isn't it? Research utilizing electroshocks. It kind of removes it a little, kind of makes it sound, like it was a scientific study, was conducted at BYU in the 1970s. In 1976, BYU accepted a dissertation from a psychology graduate student named Max Ford McBride, which documented his research and experimentation with gay aversion therapy using electroshocks to the volunteers' biceps. Eugene Thorne, head of the psychology department at BYU in the 1970s, explained that BYU engaged in the research because various medical journals were publishing success in gay aversion and conversion therapies, and that it was worthy of doing further research. So this is all true. This tracks with, as we described, was happening at other universities, hospitals during the mid-70s. What do you think about this statement from Mormon R, Landon?
Yeah, I think it's accurate. I think as all of us have learned about church apologetics, they always start out with an accurate statement and then try to explain it away as if it was okay because of these reasons, and ignore the fact that as you know, people who are supposed to have access to revelation, that maybe they would be ahead of everybody else in realizing that gay people are also children of God and created in his image, and that rather than trying to change them, uh, that we could see that God actually created them, and research how we could be more inclusive rather than more. But I digress. There's more to this, much more to this than just this. This went completely overboard, and I can guarantee you none of the other universities out there were doing what BYU was doing with gay students.
Yep, I'm sure that's absolutely true. It gets darker and darker. Absolutely. Another question that was posed was, how exactly was the aversion therapy administered in the BYU psychology department research? This is a picture from Clockwork Orange. Don't be too disturbed. It's Clockwork Orange, the famous movie and book. Go ahead, Landon. Why don't you read that?
In the McBride study, 14 volunteers, each of whom reported unwanted homosexual desires, were divided into two groups of 7. Volunteers were shown images of clothed and nude males and asked to fantasize about the images. Mildly painful electric shocks at levels set by the subject were delivered to the biceps of the volunteers at various times during the sessions. I think we need to point out here, they're talking about the McBride study and 14 volunteers who participated in this study, making it sound as if this is the only electroshock therapy that was engaged in BYU. The person that we're about to talk to was not one of these 14 volunteers. Right. And as you hear his story, you'll find that this had to have gone on much larger than just this McBride study, if the McBride study was made up of only 14 volunteers. In fact, it may be that the McBride study led to them saying, "Oh, look, we can do this and be successful at it. Let's start bringing other people in and doing this with them."
Yeah, this was actually next level, wasn't it? All right, let's go to our next slide. Okay, so just to name the names here of the people that were involved at BYU, who are Max Ford McBride and Professor Eugene Thorne. So as we said before, in 1976, graduate student Max Ford McBride, under the tutelage of Dr. Eugene Thorne, head of the BYU psychology department, ran a 2-year study titled Effect of Visual Stimuli in Electric Aversion Therapy as a dissertation for his doctorate degree at BYU. And there's a picture right there of the cover of the dissertation. I'm assuming you can still find it there in the library. McBride and Thorne showed both heterosexual and homosexual porn to the men, having them press a button that would shock them through electrodes attached to their penis while they were becoming aroused. McBride still practices psychology in Utah. Thorne was later associated with the controversial Challenger and Provo Canyon schools and is now deceased. If you're aware of the scenarios at those schools, that's another podcast altogether. So those are kind of the players there at BYU, a graduate student and the professor that was overseeing that graduate student. Okay, why don't you read this one? This is very relevant, Landon.
Yeah, so who is Professor Robert Card? Dr. Robert D. Card, who worked in private practice and was a psychologist on the BYU campus, went so far as to get a patent for a device that would measure when a penis began to be aroused, which he called a penismograph.
I think. Yes, I believe. Yeah. Correct us in the chat.
Yeah, Ray mentions this, and I think he says it correctly. Card published a paper on his electroshock therapy techniques in 1975. It is still available on BYU's archive site. So interesting that a BYU professor invented the penisograph.
Yes. Yeah. And our guest is going to describe this in detail because it happened to him. There's a little graphic there. I kind of fixed it so we don't get a copyright strike, but you kind of get the idea that this machine will measure arousal. and depending on what stimuli is shown. So, whew, this is rough to talk about. All right. So, of course, what everybody wants to know and what everybody talks about when you mention electroshock therapy in regards to our next prophet in line, right? That's I think what people are thinking. Dallin Oaks will be the prophet next. Didn't Dallin Oaks claim that the electroshock aversion therapy did not happen while he was president at BYU? This is a question, again, being asked on an apologetic site. And the site says, yes, in a Q&A session at the University of Virginia, President Oaks said that electric shock treatment never went on under his administration. However, and now they're going to set the record straight because there is a record, and so they have to come out and say there's no way around this. However, he was mistaken. Didn't lie, he was mistaken, as the McBride dissertation was accepted in 1976. President Oaks served as president of BYU from 1971 to 1980. So there's no way around that date, the time frame. President Oaks was the president when the dissertation was accepted. But from this interpretation, when President Oaks denied that it happened at the university, he was just mistaken about the dates. And if we go to the next slide, you can read that. It's a little more detail on what he said.
Yeah. I think he was given the opportunity to correct that, and he refused to do so.
Yeah, he won't mention it anymore. Yep.
Okay, at the University of Virginia, Oaks participated in an event titled The Future of Religious Freedom, a conversation with Dallin H. Oaks and Douglas Laylock, presented by the Karsh Center for Law and Democracy and Rex E. Lee Law Society. In the pre-speech Q&A session, Oaks was asked several questions about LGBTQ people and the church. One question was about addressing the past behavior of the church toward LGBTQ community members. This is the question, what have you done to address some of the things you have done in the past, including the things that you have said and overseen the enforcement of electroshock and vomiting aversion therapy for LGBT students at BYU, an unnamed audience member asked. Oaks replied, let me say about electric shock treatments at BYU, when I became president at BYU, that had been discontinued earlier, and it never went on under my administration. And this is in 2021. So by this time, everyone knew that this electroshock, everyone seems to have known it was going on under Oaks's administration as president there, except for Oaks, evidently, because this was being talked about long before 2021 that he was overseeing this, and he evidently never bothered to check. That seems highly unlikely.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's an important question. And I think when he does become the prophet of the LDS Church, which maybe sooner than later, I believe this question will probably come up again. It's a really important and big question. But as the apologetics say, he just kind of didn't remember or made a mistake. And it pretty much, there's no mistake. So what was BYU like when Oaks was the president? This is no longer apologetic. And again, as I said, this was my era at BYU. I entered as a freshman in 84. So I was there in the mid 80s at BYU. So this is from another article. What was BYU like when President Oaks was president of BYU? And we have had this confirmed by so many sources, haven't we, Landon, as far as what I'm about to read? Yes, so many. Under Oaks, a system of surveillance and searches of dorms of problem students, including suspected homosexuals, was implemented. This included electronic recording devices, which BYU security chief Robert Telshaw confirmed in 1975 had been planted on students to gather information. In reference to the widespread campaign to find homosexuals among BYU students, Oaks stated, "Two influences we wish to exclude from the BYU community are active homosexuals and drug users, and those subjects are therefore among those with which our security force is concerned." What's a security force at a university?
Yeah, this is police officers. The BYU is allowed under state law to have its own police force as a university, which means that they have police officers hired by and reporting to church officials. to me, this just raises all kinds of. I know it's gone to court. I know they tried to get it pulled when they did an investigation on a former MTC president who sexually abused someone, and it was the church's police force that investigated it, and whether that's appropriate, because are they going to try to protect the church and the church's name in these cases? It was allowed to stand. This just infuriates me, because you've got a church using police powers that they legitimately have, running background checks, running license plate numbers against people who they deem as threats to the church itself. And we'll see some of the things they did here.
Yep. Goes on to say 4 years later, BYU's newspaper, the Daily Universe, reported Oaks using BYU security to be asking BYU security to be especially watchful for any student homosexual infractions. BYU's security force conducted stakeouts looking for license plates of BYU students at gay bars in Salt Lake City. They also placed fake contact advertisements in a gay Salt Lake City newspaper to entrap gay students. This resulted in the arrest of Dave Chipman, who was no longer a BYU student at the time. However, the director of public relations for the university stated that by 1979, Oaks ordered BYU security to stop surveilling gay bars and to cease posting entrapment advertisements.
Yeah, the reason this is so upsetting to me is they're going to Salt Lake City to gay bars, taking license plates, running those license plates to determine if any of the people there, if any of these vehicles are registered to BYU students. Well, what are you doing here? You're not only are you catching anyone who's a BYU student, you're surveilling everybody, whether they go to BYU or not, and running their license plates and tracking their history. This is police state right here, run under President Oaks, who was a Utah Supreme Court justice. How in the world does he get away with this? Yeah. This just seems to violate every constitutional right of any citizen, including the BYU students, who have every right to go to a gay bar if that's what they decide to do. It's not illegal, and yet here they are doing this. I've also heard this same thing happen with church security using this same process during the Equal Rights Amendment, and when they would have ERA gatherings, they would go and take license plate numbers and find out if any of those were registered to active LDS people. So this is the kind of police state that gay people were living in at BYU in the 1970s.
Yep. And as I said, we've had this confirmed by other guests, by people that I know personally. So this was really happening. Let's go to the next slide.
And this came right off of Wikipedia. And as we said, the other article was out of Salt Lake, one of the Salt Lake papers or Salt Lake magazines.
Yep.
So,
yep, I have everything documented. So this is the actual entrapment ad that they described in the previous slide, that they would put in papers trying to get people to respond so then they could catch them. What does it say, Landon?
Yeah, this is the Associated Press article from 27 October 1979, quoted in the Kokomo, Indiana Kokomo Tribune. The letter sought people interested in forming a BYU gay underground. David Chipman, although not a BYU student, met his contact in the student center, but was arrested by the man in a canyon away from the school. The man revealed he was a BYU police officer posing as a homosexual. Kelshaw admits a BYU detective wrote the unauthorized gay underground letter. So here is a copy of that letter, and BYU security was attempting to say, we're trying to start, they posted a newspaper article saying we're trying to start an underground community for gay voices at BYU. And when this man, David Chipman, responded to the ad, David Chipman was not a BYU student, but he went to BYU to try to help open and start this movement based on this newspaper written by an undercover police officer. He was arrested. Evidently, what is it, a state law that you can't have a gay movement in 1979? But he was arrested by BYU police off campus, which you wouldn't think BYU could arrest off campus, but I know that if you're a Utah peace officer, you have authority to make an arrest anywhere in the state of Utah. So this is more of that disturbing that a BYU police officer has authority to arrest non-students off campus as a result of an entrapment ad, which in itself would seem to be illegal.
Yeah, and the ad actually says there's 3 different ads. One's from November of 78, one's December, one looks like it might be January, and it says BYU Gay Underground. Note community voice. Person interested in meeting other gays going to BYU. All correspondence will go through the open door for safety reasons. Write the open door number 1004. That's complete entrapment.
Yeah. You're telling them, hey, this is open. This is all okay. Come meet me, and we'll do this. And then when you go meet them, they arrest you. Wow.
Yeah. Wow is all you can say. Wow. No, there's no way around this. And if you go to the next slide, it just made me start thinking about the stories of people that I know personally. We have a wonderful quote here from, who is that from, Landon? Is that Wilkinson? Yes.
Yes.
It says, nor do we intend to admit to our campus any homosexuals. If any of you have this tendency and have not completely abandoned it, may I suggest that you leave the university immediately after this assembly. We do not want others on this campus to be contaminated by your presence. This is the president of BYU and an active Latter-day Saint. There he is. So
who has a building named after him now.
Who has a building, and that is the Wilkinson Center right there on the left, right next to him. That's where the cafeteria is and student services and things like that. So I put that up there because when I was there in 1984, it was very well known that the bathroom on the main floor right next to what was the candy counter, I admit I went there way too often, chocolate covered peanuts, my favorite. That bathroom was a place where they would entrap students. Everybody knew it. Somebody would tell you to meet there in the men's bathroom, and then there would be a signal between the stalls, and security would get you. Security was consciously trying to entrap. They were trying to entice. They were reaching out to students, and they were trying to get them to meet there in that bathroom. And I've told this story before about a friend. It was a friend of my roommate. And he was gay. He was kind of part of the underground that was going on there. And he was feeling increasing pressure. They were hounding people. They were hunting people. And so he asked my roommate to pose as his girlfriend, which she agreed to do. And they were actually sent to standards office to prove that they were indeed boyfriend and girlfriend, that he was not gay, but this was his girlfriend. I mean, you can't make this up. And then the strangest thing, I got a phone call from the honor code office, from standards, asking me to describe their relationship. Do I see them hug and kiss? Do they make out? Do they stay together late at night? It was a weird scenario because typically you don't say things like that about your roommate in a heterosexual relationship because that would get them in trouble. But in this case, they wanted to hear that to prove, that it was a boyfriend-girlfriend scenario. So absolutely ridiculous. That was my kind of touch on that. And then the other picture up there is a picture of the MTC, because we have another person known to Mormonish Podcast who's told this story multiple times, how his roommate, when he was a college student, he himself was gay, his roommate was part of this security force, and his roommate asked him if he would pose as a teacher at the MTC to try to entrap another teacher that some people in charge thought might be gay. And he, of course, said no, as far as what he told us, right, Landon? He said, no, I won't do that. And then the really ironic part is that on some level, as roommates, it was just alluded that they actually enjoyed a closer relationship. So it was almost like the security guy goes out during the day to do what he has to do, but he's living a double life. And that's tragic too. The whole thing is just abhorrent and tragic. So, and I'm sure a lot of you in the comments have heard stories or know people or maybe have your own story about this era, but this was a real thing. This was happening at BYU. Yeah. And in fact, you may remember our episode that we did probably about, what would you say, 6 months ago, maybe
Yeah,
we
well,
put it out. Yeah, called the 1980s BYU Gay Witch Hunt, Stories from 5 Men Who Lived It, Told for the First Time. And we had 5 wonderful guests who had never told their story before. They were not a victim of electroshock therapy. However, they were theater majors, all living in the same house, and they definitely faced the scrutiny, the attempts to entrap. They saw fellow students just disappear in the middle of the night, sent home. They did know of people that had undergone the electroshock therapy. I'm going to link this episode in the show notes because this is one of our more powerful episodes, as these men had not talked to each other for years, coming back together in their mid 60s, talking about what it was like to just be these 19, 20-year-old kids. And it's just tragic because they gave us a series of pictures, didn't they, Landon? Just from the day, they were just fun-loving, bright, beautiful boys. And yet the pictures didn't show what was going on internally, as they were being told they were broken. They were being told there was something wrong with them. They had an illness, a sickness, and they were being hounded at the university. So it gives me goosebumps even to talk about the episode. It was pretty incredible, and these men were pretty incredible. So we'll link that in the show notes if you want to do a little further research on that. So now we are going to roll tape, aren't we, Landon? And we are going to introduce you guys to our friend Ray, who has a story that is going to be really, really hard to hear. It was very difficult for us to get through this interview, and we just wanted to reach through the screen and give Ray the biggest hug in the entire world. He's an amazing person, a resilient person, an incredible person, and his bravery in actually sharing this story is absolutely incredible. So, of course, for privacy reasons, he's not going to be on screen as his actual self, but this is his story, and we've had multiple conversations with him before the podcasting with him. And so we'll just let you guys listen to Ray's story, and then we'll kind of do some wrap up after that. And now we would like to bring on a special guest that we have. We are here with Ray. How are you, Ray?
I'm fine. How are you?
We are good today. This is such an unusual scenario for us. We kind of came across your story in a chat somewhere where you mentioned it, and we asked if you would feel comfortable reaching out. You did. You emailed us, and then we had a phone call, and we talked a little bit more about it. And of course, the whole thing is a sensitive topic, as we know, as we've already discussed. But your story is so very different from some of the other stories we've heard about this. So we thought it was really important for you to tell what happened to you, didn't we, Landon? We were kind of amazed and floored by Ray's story.
We did, and obviously Ray is not your real name. That's a name we're using to protect your identity because of how sensitive this topic is. But we certainly appreciate your willingness to come on and to have this discussion with us.
Mm-hmm.
This is all fine with me.
Yep, that's good. That's what we want. So I think we'll just start and let you tell your story. Maybe tell a little bit about you growing up, and then I think this all kind of starts out after your mission. So yeah, just kind of let all of our viewers and listeners know who you are, and we'll launch into your story.
Okay. Well, I grew up in mostly New Mexico, and a typical Mormon household with double-digit children. I'm third oldest, and are we still on?
Yep.
Oh, okay. It seemed like
no. That's the thing about Mormonish. It's so conversational. It feels like we're just talking to friends. And then you go, oh, wait, did I say that on the air?
Well, this whole thing happened 45 years ago,
Exactly.
and I'm 67 years old now. So there's going to be memory lapses, but I'll do my best to try to tell it sequentially or chronologically and to relay what happened on certain days in certain situations.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And in order to make it make sense, I might have to speculate about what went on in the background on occasion, but I'm going to try to be very specific about when I'm speculating and about when I'm talking about what I really know happened.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Okay, so this occurred in the fall semester of BYU in 1979. I was 22 years old. I had come off my mission a year before that, and I was attending just a regular class in a regular classroom setting, the 1 hour class that lasts 50 minutes, where you have a 10-minute break to run to your next class.
Yeah, so you were on campus. I think
was
that's
on
important.
Yeah. Yes, I was on campus. And the professor, before the end of the lecture, said, would Ray stick around? I need to talk to you. And I said, sure. And so I went up to see him after the class had left, and he said there were two people out in the hallway waiting to meet with me. And I said, okay. And I went out in the hall, and there was a woman and a man there. Now, of course, I don't remember their names, but the woman introduced herself as my advisor. Now, you need to understand that the university assigns advisors for every single student, and this is a staff advisor. So if there's any go-between, any interaction between this person and the university and administration, you go through that advisor. And you can also go see the advisor if you have questions about scheduling classes and anything else. There's also another advisor you can be given, and this is when you get your major area of study. Like if you pick biology, for instance, they might give you a biology professor as an advisor on your major only. And you would go to see that person about questions about your class for getting your major. But anything related to the university goes through this one advisor. Now, she's really busy because she has a whole slew of students assigned to her. I know because much later I went to work for a university, so I kind of understand some of these things. And so it's really, really, really rare for an advisor to seek out a student. Because
so she's somebody that has an office and students just parade through her door
Right.
all day long. They're
Right.
assigned to her probably alphabetically, and they talk to her. But in this case, she left her office and came and found one student, and that's you.
Right.
Why would she do this? This is already very unusual.
And of course, she would know my schedule, and she would know
Where to find you.
where to find me exactly. And so, and she would also know that I didn't have an upcoming class the next hour, so she could talk to me at that time. So this looks all planned by her. She introduced the guy that was with her as a doctor of psychology. Now, my impression, and this is my memory only, is that he was a BYU professor, but I cannot be 100% sure of that. But why would he be on campus,
Yeah.
Exactly. But for sure, the admissions counselor is a BYU
Right.
employee representing the university. And I think it's interesting that the professor was also involved, that they had the time to go to the professor ahead of time and say, please hold Ray after, make sure he comes talk to us. So you got a BYU professor, the class you're in, you got an admissions counselor, and then you have somebody that you possibly remember being a BYU psychology professor, but you don't know for sure on that one.
Right. So they asked if we could go sit in a classroom and talk for a little bit. And of course I said yes, because I didn't have an upcoming class that hour.
Did you have any idea? I mean, what did you think? Did you think it was about your grades? Or another key piece of this is you had a scholarship. Did you think it was about something academic?
Yeah, I thought, I was a bad boy on occasion and had long hair that touched my collar and touched my ears, and I thought maybe I'd done a code violation and she was out after me. That's what my impression was. But she introduced the doctor psychology guy, and he then said to me, we have found out that your twin brothers back home in New Mexico, who are 12 years old, might be gay. And we're concerned that you therefore might have gay tendencies. And as you know, you cannot be on BYU campus as a gay student. So we need to take care of this situation, and we need to assess whether you're gay, and we need to then, if you are, if you have gay tendencies, we have programs that can fix this.
What did you think? I mean, you think you might be getting called on the fact that you have a little bit longer hair, and now they're talking about your family members. I mean,
Right.
did you?
And here I am. I'm this naive 22-year-old who had never even had sex of any type or any sexual relations with anybody ever. And I'd never even seen pornography. And here they were talking about my brothers potentially being gay.
And they're 12.
And they're 12 years old.
And that's what we both said at the same time. And they're 12. Did you make any kind of connection thinking, now, how did that information from my home make it here to campus? I mean, what do you think? A bishop called a bishop? I mean, what's your guess on that?
Well, I have two guesses. My one guess is that the bishop back home was interviewing my brothers for like becoming deacons or to go to temple for temple recommend, or potentially they were doing naughty things together and my parents caught them and my parents turned them in, something like that. And so then he assesses, oh, they might be gay because they're two boys, you know.
Right. And they're 12.
And they're 12. And he knows me personally because he knows I went to BYU. And so I'm thinking, he's thinking, I can't let Ray get in trouble at BYU. I'd better take care of this situation. And so he, I believe, just calls the university. And of course, they would funnel him through my advisor. And then,
he made the determination that because your brothers were doing something, whatever it was or not, that other people in the family might also have an issue. And he had to reach out and make sure that, you know, you get the help you need, I guess.
I'm thinking they think they're probably helping me. And of course, me at the time, I thought they were probably helping me too.
Yeah, I know.
Did they call your advisor, you think, or did they call your bishop in the ward and he called your advisor?
That's the other possibility, is that
your BYU bishop.
He contacted my BYU ward bishop, who then went through the advisor at BYU. That's the other possibility, yeah.
Right.
Was there ever a discussion in your family about this? Did they ever know about this or hear about this?
Much later, I discussed it with one of my brothers, but
at the time, you didn't go home and say, wow, a really weird thing happened.
No.
Because it only gets more disturbing. I mean, it gets disturbing to the point of tears, I feel. Yes. But right now, you must just be reeling. You're sitting in a classroom. Your trusted advisor is there. There's an authority figure, a professor that you think is connected to the university. You're hearing things about back home. So you know your bishop must be involved somehow. You probably think maybe your parents know. I mean, I don't know I guess you would sit there thinking, well, everybody seems on board with this. I better just listen and do what they say. I mean, I can see myself thinking something like that.
Well, I was trusting that the PhD with psychology, that he's saying your brothers might be gay and therefore you might have gay tendencies. And of course, back then they thought there was much more genetic component to it. So I'm not wanting to be gay. I'm not wanting to violate BYU code of ethics.
Back in the day,
That's actually kind of funny that they would think that it was a genetic tie, because your brothers, that genetically you'd be more predisposed to do that, because during that whole time they kept saying, no, you're not born that way, it's a choice. So why are they tying it genetically if they're saying it's a choice?
Because it was
because they knew the truth, that it was not a choice.
I think that's exactly right.
The PhD in psychology knows better. So.
Yes.
Well, at the time, he would have believed it was a genetic thing.
Yeah, I'm sure so. So once they explained the scenario, then what did they offer to you? What was the call to action? What did they want you to do after they gave you this information?
Well, he said that they could test me to see if I was gay, and that if I had any gay tendencies, they could treat me for it.
Oh.
And they gave me a number to call, or I gave them my number to call. I don't remember which direction that went. And so, I went to my apartment and eventually set up an appointment to go to a psychologist's office. Now, when I went to this psychologist's office a week or so later, it looked like it was a campus for a whole bunch of psychologists to use. So
and it
now
was not BYU campus. This is somewhere off campus.
Right.
And the phone number that you called, they didn't say, hello, BYU Rec Center. It
Right.
was something else. Okay.
Right.
I want to step back because you said, they gave you this number and said, oh, we're with the, BYU Gay Patrol and we're here to help you. What did they use? Did you just volunteer to go, or did they use anything to coerce you?
I forgot to mention that the advisor said to me, you cannot be gay and be a BYU student. Back then the code of ethics was more strict than it is now. You could not even be gay and be a student. Now you can be gay and be a student as long as you don't act on it. Well, they've gotten a lot better, haven't they?
Yeah.
Ironic.
But she also said you have a full ride scholarship, and your scholarship can be canceled if we find out that you're violating the code of ethics. And so they put the leverage of, you've got to do this. And of course, I'm not wanting to be gay at the time.
Exactly.
And I'm not wanting to lose my scholarship. So they won me over pretty quickly, saying, okay, yeah, sure, whatever you want, I trust you.
Yeah. And you have to fix it. You have to fix whatever's happening, because your scholarship, your ability to be a student and continue your education, your perhaps membership in the church, you're just a newly returned missionary, everything's on the line.
Right.
You can lose everything. So of course you're going to do whatever they say. Sure, I'll call this number. Sure, I'll do whatever you want. Everything is on the line.
And because you're a returned missionary, you've just spent the last 2 years doing whatever they ask of you and completely trusting the church. And you've been teaching about the church, so you fully trusted that what they were doing was for your own good.
Yeah.
Well, I really believed it was for my own good because, I believe I was very naive and very prejudiced against gays at the time. So I didn't want to be a gay. And they won me over pretty easily with that, and with the threat of losing my scholarship, of course. But
and a full ride scholarship.
Right.
I mean, a full ride. Like, you had so much to lose. Your future basically was on the line.
Yeah, this was the fall of 1979, and I only had the winter of 1980 semester to go, plus the summer term.
Oh, you were close.
So I was less than a year away from graduating, and so they really had me over the barrel. You better do this, or you're not going to graduate, and I'm really close. And what am I going to do if they turn me down with just less than a year left?
And was it just to clarify, it was your BYU advisor who told you all this? It wasn't the psychologist telling you about your scholarship. It was your academic advisor explaining
my
academic issue.
The BYU, or the professor or whatever he was, the psychologist, told me you cannot be gay and be on campus as a student. She mentioned the scholarship.
Okay, so the two of them together went through every possible outcome, and they're all very negative for you unless you do what they're telling you to do.
Right. And so now we got to remember, at BYU at the time, the only advanced degrees they had were law school degrees. There was no such thing as getting a PhD in anything. So this is a psychology professor, and having taught at a university, I know how important it is for them to be able to do their research and be able to publish papers, and to mentor students are getting a PhD. So BYU is at an unfair disadvantage there with the professors they were hiring that could not mentor students to become PhDs. So my guess, and this is my guess, is that this psychologist office off campus was where this guy was doing his supplemental stuff, that he was actually just one of a whole bunch of them who were taking on therapy sessions to do more, since they can't take on a PhD student or do research or any of that stuff, might as well do this and make a little extra money.
Yeah, or even just for the academic pursuit. I
Right.
think about, I was at BYU, started in 1984, and there were certain degrees where, for example, I was in the fine arts program. I was an art minor. And if you were taking figure drawing, in order to get a master's in figure drawing, you've got to be able to draw the nude form. You have to be skilled at drawing the human body. They can't offer that class at BYU in 1984. I don't know how it is now. They went off campus to an art studio, and everybody knew that's what you did. And you went off campus and you could get your credit for learning how to draw the human form. And I would think there are other things like that too. BYU as a research university, back in the day, there are many situations like that where it's almost laughable that you can't do what you're required for a PhD, like you said, to mentor a PhD student in psychology or art. I'm sure there are other in the chat. Let me know, is there anything else you've heard of? But I for sure knew people that had to go off campus to have a nude figure drawing class, something that's standard freshman level stuff at any other university.
Right. Yeah. Well,
yeah, that's interesting.
That's why I went to another university to go on and get my master's degree and to pursue my PhD, which I never completed. But
right.
Well,
wow. So you called the phone number and you said they asked me to call.
And so I walked in and there was a plaque up there with a whole bunch of names on it. What I don't remember is whether the person I met at BYU, the psychology guy at BYU, whether his name was on that list. I didn't spend enough time looking at it. But the secretary up front told me that a person would come out to see me, and a couple minutes later, a female walks through the door and introduces herself. Now, she did not say doctor, so she's not a MD psychiatrist. Psychiatrists have to get a medical degree before they then go specialize in psychiatry. She's also most likely not a PhD in psychology, because most of them like to say doctor in front of their name.
If you earned it, you say it. That's for sure.
But, maybe a therapist doesn't want to intimidate, so not use the doctor term. Who knows?
Right.
But she told me that she had talked to that person, that psychologist at BYU, and knew the situation. So he is intimately involved in setting this up with her on the off-campus location.
Yeah, so there's a link, there's a tie. You've got the professor, meet people in the hall. You've got the people in the hall that are an advisor. You've got the advisor saying, listen to what this professor or doctor is saying. Whether or not he's a BYU professor, we don't know. And then you go off campus, but even then, you definitely know there's a connection to what happened to you on campus, BYU campus, because the people in the off-campus office are fully aware of your scenario and what they want to have happen there.
Now, are you paying for this session, or is someone else paying for this?
Well, this session, I did not pay anything. What I don't know is if I had done further ones, whether I would have paid.
Okay. So in other words, someone's paying for this, but it's not you.
Right. And I'm assuming it's somebody at BYU, or that maybe it's, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate.
Who knows?
So she anyway takes me back into a room, and it's a very small room. It has a desk in there and a control panel on the desk with electronic stuff on it. and a chair that she can sit in, and there's a window you can see between it and the room next to it. And in the room next to it, I could see a chair and electronic equipment. And there's no place for me to sit down in the little small control room. So she walks me straight back through the door into that other room and sits me down in the chair. And then I look over and I notice that it's a mirror. So some people call it a two-way mirror. Some people call it a one-way mirror. I think it's technically a one-way mirror. It's window on her side and a mirror on my
Yeah.
side.
So she can
she's in
see
a
you, but
control
you can't
room.
see her.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know she's there watching.
Oh yeah, because there's no other place to sit in that control room
Yeah.
other than at the desk right next to the window, right next to the chair.
Okay.
And she picks up a couple of coils or bands with coils on them and says, I need to put these on your upper arms. And she slipped them onto my upper arms. She didn't tell me what they were.
Were they metal? Were they metal or?
Well, from what I remember, they were like what you see in a lie detector test, those coil type things they put
okay.
around
Like-
your chest, but
Okay.
it was on arms instead.
Okay.
That's what my memory is, though it could have been that it was a band with coils on the outside. I don't know.
Was it on both of your arms or was
Both
it just
arms.
both arms? So one on each side, kind of the bicep area, you have
Right.
something that goes all the way around. And is that attached to a wire or something?
Yeah,
or is
there
it
are
just
wires coming off of it going
Okay.
to a machine of some type.
Okay. What did you think that was for?
I thought it was to detect like lie detector. That was
Oh,
what
okay. Okay, like it would register some kind of heartbeat or something, and they might
Right.
ask you questions, or
Right.
that's legitimate. I can see anybody thinking that, not knowing what they'd walked into.
And then the shocking part comes. She pulled out this little tiny band that looks like a watch band, and it has wire attached to it that goes to a different machine that then the coils went to. And she said, okay, after I leave the room, and here she is being matter of fact, not preparing me for this. After I leave the room, you are to take your pants and underwear down while you're in the chair, and you are to put this on your flaccid penis, and we're going to use it to detect arousal. Ha!
What I can imagine that your heart rate went from 0 to 60 right there. I mean, you had no idea that's what you were walking into.
I had no idea that was what I'm walking into. It's no idea that anybody even knew about this kind of stuff because I was so naive. And here she is being just matter of fact about it. And I'm thinking, gosh, even though there appeared to be a barrier where she could not see my crotch area in the chair, she knows what I'm doing and she knows what's going on there. And she's a female, and this is going to bother me, just the fact that she's a female, knowing what I'm doing and what I'm going to be doing. It was, oh, was I overwhelmed? And I'm in a total state of daze at this point. So she leaves the coil or the band with me, and I found out later that this thing is called a penile plethysmograph. It's a little device that they put on the penis when it's flaccid. It takes a measurement of the circumference of the penis, and then they give you stimuli to see if you get aroused to it. And you don't have to become fully aroused, just a little tiny bit to change the circumference. And then it sends a signal to the control panel to tell the person we've had the beginnings of arousal. Horrid, horrible device, if you ask me.
I'm sorry, we're kind of speechless, Ray. I'm sorry, and I know we knew of your story, but when you tell it like this, I honestly, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and so she goes into the other room. I just obey. I'm in a daze, but I go ahead and obey, and I put it on. And there's a projector behind me and a screen in front of me, and she darkens the room. and there's a speaker system between where we can talk to each other. And she flashes a photo on the screen just out of nowhere. And it's a photo of a nude female lewd in a very naughty pose. And I had never seen anything like that. I had never participated in pornography, and here she was flashing this at me. And of course, I felt the beginnings of arousal. And she just said, okay, that's fine. Took the
Yeah, that's fine, right? BYU sent you to see pornography and you
Right.
saw a female, and that's fine.
and that's fine. And she turns takes the picture down, and then she waits a while and puts on some background music and tells me that I need to relax. Now, what I found out later is that the penile plethysmograph does not work unless you're first in a flaccid state. So if you begin to be aroused, it has to wait until you go back to a flaccid state. It's a thing called detumescing. So each time that I became aroused, they would have to wait. So we waited a few minutes, and then she said, okay, we're ready again. And this time she flashed a picture of a male nude he's aroused and he's in a fully lewd position. And I had never seen anything like this before. It was beyond what I could have ever anticipated. And I apparently became a little bit aroused to it, because then I suddenly got these jolting shocks to my upper arms. Physical, electrical shocks. The shocks were a little bit worse than uncomfortable, but a little bit less than painful. It's not something you want to go through. And I'm thinking, why is this? And then she says, okay. And then the shock ends and the picture comes down and we wait a little bit. So I'm beginning to think I must have had some arousal to that. And this is their therapy that they treat you, is to shock you when you're having arousal to something you're not supposed to.
And so do you think that that's automatically connected, like a
No,
slight
no.
arousal, or do you think then she saw the indication there was arousal and had to hit some button then to shock you?
My later research said those were two separate devices. So she must have seen on the control panel that I was beginning to be aroused, and that she had to either push a button or flip a switch to shock me a little bit. That's at least what I would believe.
She had to shock you.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And you'd never seen any kind of picture like this. You're a very innocent returned missionary. You'd never
Right.
seen either of the pictures, and the shock of it.
Right.
Anybody would have a reaction. I mean, this seems like a study that's not very well thought out.
No. And I found out later it wasn't. So, they had three types of pictures. They had male only nudity, female only nudity, and female male. And they just alternated among those. And apparently I became aroused to each one a little bit, because there was a detumesce period in between on each of them. And every time that was male only photo, I also received the physical shock to my upper arms.
Wow. So they're training you basically.
Yeah. That's exactly what they think that delivering the shock is going to make you stop being aroused to things you're not supposed to be aroused to. Like, I'm not supposed to be aroused at something I've never seen before. Yeah.
That's what I mean. And can you describe, I mean, what do you think the pain level would be like? I mean, I know at first you were just kind of stunned. Did it get worse each time, or
No,
was
it
it
stayed the same. It was,
okay.
I don't know how they found that sweet spot right in between uncomfortable and painful. It wasn't quite painful, but it's not something you want to go through. So that's the best I can describe it.
And how many times, how many pictures did you look at, and how many
I
shots?
don't know. It was approximately 30, I guess, which would mean approximately 10 were shocks.
Mm-hmm. And this lasted how long?
It was supposed to last 45 minutes, but because I was aroused partially to everything and had to detumesce after everything, it lasted more like an hour and a half that I was in there.
So it's amazing that this would even measure anything, because, you know, you're a 22-year-old
Right.
young man who's never seen anything, and you're sitting in a chair with something strapped to your
Right.
penis while a woman's in the
And
other
a
room
woman. Yeah.
measuring that.
And yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. How was I getting aroused whatsoever in that circumstance? But apparently it measured that I was starting the very beginnings of arousal, and that's all it takes.
Well, I feel like there's fight or flight too in that scenario, which you
Oh,
can have
yeah.
that reaction to any kind of,
Right.
bodily trauma or stress, I mean, that's very simplistic, but I don't think anything about that would accurately measure anything given all those variables.
And I don't know how many males don't have some reaction to seeing other male nudity, especially male female pornography.
Yeah.
Does it turn them off? Obviously not, or they wouldn't be watching it. So I'm not sure what this test really was for.
Did they show males together, or was it always
Yes.
just one? Oh, okay. So they
So-
showed sexual interaction between,
Right.
did they show a male and a female?
They showed male only, male doing stuff together, female only, female doing stuff together, and female male doing stuff together.
Okay, let me ask you this. When they showed female, did they shock you?
No.
Okay.
Okay, exactly.
Okay, Landon, I mean, seriously, think this through.
Yeah. They're clearly they're only going to shock you whenever it's a male in order to train you, is what they're thinking. Just like a dog, that if
Right.
we keep shocking you whenever you see a male, that's going to become unpleasant, and
Right.
therefore you're not going to get excited anymore, because instead of pleasure, you're going to feel pain and associate pain with male nudity, whereas the female, you can experience pleasure.
Right. Two females together, the church is okay with that, or
Yeah.
BYU is. They're not going to shock you. Two females together is fine. One female is fine.
Well, I'm supposed to have some type of reaction to that, which is
Yeah.
meaning I'm not gay. That they're
Right.
lesbian, but that's okay. But I'm not gay. That's the
That's
important
what I'm
thing.
trying to get at.
Yeah.
BYU, whoever it is, the church is totally fine with a guy watching with no shock. Oh my gosh.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and a naive person who'd never seen any of this.
Yeah. You're going to react to everything because it's a whole
Exactly.
different world.
It's
You
Right,
have,
right.
Like the
you,
first time you find a Playboy and you're strapped to a machine with a woman watching and measuring.
Right, exactly. Imagine going through that, which is what I'm going
oh
through.
my,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
We're not laughing. We are laughing because this is so horrifying.
It
I
is
can't
horrifying.
even comprehend it.
Ah,
So you finally get done with this and you just walk out. They give you
Well,
a sucker. What do they do
Well,
at the end?
I really expected that she would then talk to me and soothe me and tell me what I'd just gone through, but instead she walked me out into the lobby and said, "Now wait here a minute and I'll come back for you." And she came back and took me back to what I think was her office, her personal office, because I remember seeing a picture of a family on a shelf behind her, and there were plaques up on the wall, which would have been her certifications, which were probably that she's a therapist, maybe a master's in psychology, and maybe she got training on both the penile plethysmograph device and the administering shock device. Probably those were the certificates on her wall. And again, I was thinking she's going to talk to me about what went on, but instead she just matter of factly said, "Well, what we have found is that you have gay tendencies and you're going to need to come back for more sessions." So that's all she said. And then she said, "Okay, you need to set an appointment with the secretary out front. I'm going to take you out into the lobby and you set an appointment." So she opened the door and threw me out into the lobby. So now, go
What
ahead.
were you thinking? What? I can't even imagine. You must have felt like you just stepped into the world of Bizarro. What were you thinking?
I was in a total daze the whole time, just overwhelmed, shocked, both literally and figuratively. I can't even think of any.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you've got to be sitting there going, I didn't think I was gay, but how can I argue they had me hooked up to a penile cinemometer
and they're
or
telling
whatever it
me
is?
I'm gay. Yeah.
It's pretty
And they're
scientific.
telling, yeah, it's got to be scientific, but I'm also a brat because this is back before the computers. She didn't have the ability to type on a computer, the patient that is leaving the door right now needs a future appointment.
Mhm.
And the appointment secretary up front doesn't have anything but little books in front of her. She doesn't have a computer in front of her to tell her the person who just came out needs an appointment. And as I walked out, there was a person talking to her, and I just left.
Yes. Bravo, Ray. Yes.
Yeah, I'm
You
thinking
got the hell out of there. That is it. That you did it. You
I'm
are a
gonna
brave person right there. You left.
I'm thinking I'm going to put this off as long as I possibly can, and they're going to have to force me to do another session. And of course, it's like what you two have speculated. The sessions would likely be the same thing until I finally went through a session where I had no beginnings of arousal to the male nudity, and then they would consider me cured, I
Because you're
guess.
so freaking traumatized at that point by the whole procedure that you have no reaction to anything.
Well, you're still supposed to react to the
Yeah.
other stuff.
I'm just saying, no, I feel like this kind of procedure completely deadens everything and you're just
Yeah.
traumatized completely.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Did you tell anyone when you went back to your apartment? Did you go, hey guys, guess what just happened to you? Didn't. I mean,
no,
how
I
could
talked
you?
to absolutely nobody about
Oh
what
my
happened.
God. And the
me.
trauma of that, just being alone in it.
Yeah, it was way too much for me to get anybody else involved. And I thought, well, I hope they don't bother me too much, and I hope the next session is a long time away from now. And then all I know is I go to my BYU ward the next Sunday, and my BYU ward bishop asked to see me, and he goes back and talks to me and says, "It has come to my attention that your brothers back home might be gay, and therefore you might be gay, and that we can't have you on BYU campus as a gay, but my understanding also is that you're getting treatment for this. And that's all I need to know. If you need to talk to me further about it, then come ahead and talk to me." So thank goodness he didn't want to be involved.
Wow, what a network of, we've seen child abusers abusing children that the church knows about and they can't say anything, but here your brothers do something and all of a sudden everybody in your world seems to know about this and associates it to you and has now condemned you as breaking.
I know, I'm trying to put this chain together. The home bishop to either the BYU bishop, or maybe he's at the end of the chain, then to someone in BYU who contacts an advisor, who then talks to a psychologist, who then sends you to a place where other people treat you. Then you're back to your home ward. Your bishop is aware. I mean, this is like 6 people right here who know these details. It's like a church court, right? Where you used to have 17 people that knew your business. So, but he didn't want, did he ever talk to you about it again? Or that was it?
That was it.
That was it. And so he just assumed it's your business. You're getting treatment. I don't want to know.
So
there it is.
Yeah. If we take a look at all 6 of them involved, the advisor is going to be too busy to ever contact me again.
Right.
Is she going to put on her calendar, make sure Ray goes through treatment? No, she's not going to have time. Is that psychologist that I met at BYU, who I think is a psychology professor? No, he's too busy with both being a professor and being a psychologist off campus, or maybe he's only an off-campus psychologist. But he's going to be too busy, and he's done his just due by talking to the therapist who administered the the shock
Mhm.
treatment. So she's the third one involved.
Yeah.
Is she going to have on her calendar somewhere, make sure Ray comes back? Well, maybe, but she's going to have a full therapy. So what difference
Right.
is
And then
it
the
going to make?
secretary,
she
she doesn't
doesn't know
know
where
who
to,
you were from anybody. You just
yeah,
came in and out. So she can't track you.
they don't
That's
know
the
where to
other
find
person.
you unless they call
Right.
the
Well,
counselor. Yeah.
well,
Right.
the secretary actually called me several times.
Oh.
Oh,
Uh-oh. What did she say? Just that
She
you're
said,
supposed to reset an appointment?
yeah, that I'm supposed to have an appointment. So she's going to be the only one who has on her calendar that I'm supposed to
Okay.
talk
Okay.
to her.
Okay.
So she's calling me, and I keep saying, I'm sorry, I'm really busy in the middle of this semester that is just overwhelming me. I can't do it right now. Can we put it off? And so eventually she stops calling, and I think I just fall through the cracks because I was able to go to school the rest of that semester. I was able to do my winter semester, my summer half semester term, and graduate in August and walk away without doing another session.
That whole time, though, did you feel like inside concerned? Who am
Oh,
I? What
yeah.
is happening? What is going on with me? I mean, did you say that was ridiculous? That's not me? Or, I mean, I'm just trying to.
Well, I did think maybe I'm possibly gay, but I'm not
Uh-huh.
going to have them torture me. That's
Okay.
what I
Okay.
had determined.
Yep. Again, a different
Good for
day,
you.
1979. It was very difficult. And you never told another person at that time. You just
Right.
never told roommates, never called home, said, Mom, Dad, you won't believe what happened to me.
Right.
Never talked to your little brothers because they're kids, they're children. That's the
Right.
thing. These are
Right.
children.
Right.
And you said, oh, go ahead.
They're 12 years old.
They're 12 years old. That's right. But you have other family members. Were any of them affected by this?
No.
Okay.
My older brother, 2 years older than me, were the only two attending BYU. Both of us had the same scholarship, but we were both trying to do advanced schedules to get through quicker. So I was taking 7 or 8 classes per semester and taking the summer terms to try to get through quicker. I graduated from high school in 75, graduated from BYU in 80, which means I completed the 6-year BYU and mission in 5 years. And
Gosh, the best and the brightest. And this is what they do to you. That's just.
my brother was the same thing. And unfortunately, one of the semesters he overwhelmed himself and got some bad grades, and they took his scholarship away. So he went to work off campus for Word Perfect back in the day when Word Perfect had its headquarters in the Provo or Orem
down there
area.
in Provo.
Yeah. And he was doing part-time to go to school. He was paying for it himself. And I caught up with him, and we graduated at the same time, which, made us best buds for life.
That's awesome. Wow. But they never contacted him about it, just you. So.
Yeah, they never contacted him, and I'm thinking it's because he was part-time or no longer had a scholarship or whatever. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, that's true, because they definitely had the scholarship to hold over your head to make sure that you would enter the program that they wanted you to enter, because you had everything to lose, like we talked about.
And he also was not attending a BYU ward. So your speculation that maybe it was the BYU ward bishop who was the coordinator of all this might be true.
That makes sense.
He does not have a BYU ward bishop. He's on an off-campus ward.
That makes sense. And just the fact that the very Sunday after you finish the therapy is when your bishop, I mean, somebody was reporting back to him, right?
Right.
And saying he came in. I mean, everybody was making sure everyone was in the loop on what was happening to you. So that makes sense to me. Yeah.
And then they let me fall through the cracks. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. So that you could move on. Oh my goodness. So, wow. And then moving on in life, did you just put that aside?
No.
I know you can't, but back in the day, that was kind of the thought. Just put it aside. Get over it. Go on,
Well, 12, 13, 14 years later or so, I realized I was not normal sexually. I was not able to get normal sexual relations with people. And so I went to see a psychologist. I was working in a completely different city in Arizona at the time. And the work had a list of psychologists you could go see. As long as you went to a certain number of sessions, they would pay for it and you do the copay. So I went to see a psychologist, and in one of the sessions, I told him about what had happened off campus at BYU, and he was angry. Oh, I have never seen anybody that angry. He said, "This penile plethysmograph, this is a worthless device. It cannot detect that you're being gay. It has less than a 60% accuracy at anything it's being used for. You might as well flip a coin." He said, "You need to get over this, and this is causing you problems, even though you only went to one session. And you are going to need," he's talking to me, he said, "I need to go talk to somebody about it, because I'm not going to have enough sessions with him to do it. So I need to go talk to a best friend or a buddy or somebody to get this entire session out in the open and processed and better handled, because obviously it was exactly like you're saying. I just pushed it into the background and hoped it went away, but it didn't. Just one session. And I'm trying to imagine in my mind, what if I had gone through more sessions?
Yeah.
What if,
Like many did.
like many people did, how many of those people went through this and 10 times worse than I did, and what their lives were like? So I took a vacation and went to see my brother, who was still working up in the Provo area, though I don't think it was for Word Perfect anymore. I think Word Perfect was gone by then. He was working for a spin-off company. And I told him what had happened, and he became just infuriated. He said, "Guess what? I've had interaction with these people." He said a few years after we graduated from BYU, he was in his off-campus ward when he was approached by a psychologist who was in his ward. And that psychologist said to him, "You have good little children there. We need to use your little children, take photos of them in the nude so we can use them in the penile plethysmograph, so that they could use the penile plethysmograph to assess whether people are pedophiles."
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness is right. And my brother, thinking it was for the greater good, actually let them do it, and has hated the fact that he let that decision go for the rest of his life. So this was more than just what they did to me. I'm thinking what they did to my brother and his kids is worse.
I'm sorry, again, I think I'm going to have to process this entire episode for quite a while. So a person in his ward approached him through the ward, a fellow ward member,
right,
who is a psychologist. Did he say this is for these therapies at BYU, or did he say it was for something independent, or do we not know?
What I found out later is that the penile plethysmograph is used for assessing supposedly whether you're gay, which they stopped doing not too long after they were doing it to me.
Right.
Assessing whether you have sadomasochistic. So if you rape somebody, they potentially are going to throw up pictures of rape victims to see if you get aroused to that. And to see if you've been arrested for being a pedophile, they would throw up pictures of little children to see if you become aroused to that. And the psychologist that I met with told me they stopped using photos not too long afterwards and started instead describing things through the speaker system to do the assessing. But he still told me it's a crapshoot. It's no better than 60% accurate. But I did some research just recently, just a couple of days ago. It's still in use. These things are being used to assess people who are arrested and put in jail. So if someone is arrested and put in jail for being a pedophile, arrested or put in jail for rape, they can use this device on them as part of the plea agreement to say, well, now we're going to do this to assess whether you really have these tendencies. So it's still in use, but it's with stories. Even though they try to say they're not in use, it said specifically some jails are still using this and some prisons are still using this.
That is so much to take in. And again, I guess we don't know what the affiliation of the person who approached your brother in the ward is.
Right,
We don't
right.
know. It could just be independent. We don't know if
Right.
he was connected to BYU, but the fact that he would go through the ward and that your brother, I'm guessing, because he's a ward member,
Right,
trusts him. It's
Right.
not like someone coming up on the street and saying, look, you've got
Right.
cute kids. This is someone in the ward. He's got a calling. He's somebody that everyone interacts with. And he says, we need to use your children
and we're doing it for the greater good.
and the greater good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
I've never heard this. I don't know if anyone in the chat knows anything about this kind of activity. I don't even know what to say.
Well, I'm personally more upset with what they did to my brother than what they did to me. That
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah,
that-
you were at least an adult. The children, had no
yeah.
say
And they
in it.
trust the
Yeah.
parents,
And-
but the
and
parents were
they're trusting.
manipulated. Yeah. Everybody was
And-
manipulated.
and now everybody in chat knows why I'm using the quote Ray name, because
Exactly.
I don't want my
Yep.
brother
Nope.
and I don't want my twin brothers exposed to what I'm
Right.
just talking about. I don't want my brother and his children to find out I'm talking about this. It's something I want to keep private away from
Yep.
them. And of course, since Mormonish is only for ex-Mormons,
They probably won't see it. No, and we understand that completely. And we just think you are so amazingly brave to even rehearse this story to us. But I feel like it's really important because as I've kind of dug into this a little more, I mean, we've all heard about the electroshock, but the details, and I'm finding that especially apologists for this scenario say people entered this study voluntarily. They wanted to cure themselves.
right.
And this is anything but voluntary. This is
Right.
being accosted on campus, your scholarship, your membership, your ability to complete your education being held over your head. This is everything opposite of voluntarily entering into something. And that was completely wrong too. Those that felt they had to enter that or were coerced, but this is a different spin, I think.
And it
This
doesn't,
is
go ahead.
this is church speak. They volunteered. We threatened to take their
Yeah. And
Their-
then they volunteered.
their
Yes.
scholarship,
Yes.
their membership,
Yes.
their enrollment in BYU. And
Their
once we
eternal
explained it to them, they
salvation.
volunteered.
Yeah,
Yeah. And once we did all that, then they
Yeah.
gladly volunteered. You're right. That is church speak. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was overwhelming, and to have them say that it's not associated with BYU, well,
Yeah.
Dallin H says that he terminated the program when he entered BYU, which was in 1972, which means they were doing it prior to 72. At least that's the way I interpret that.
Right.
But it doesn't mean they weren't forcing you off campus to go do it like they did to me.
Yeah.
Right. I know. I find it hard to believe that someone in an advisor's office, a bishop of a singles ward at BYU, all these people would know things that the head of the university would not be aware of, especially since
Right.
it's not just your
Right.
case, it's many others. I
Correct.
feel it's hard for me to believe that a bishop associated with BYU would know more than the president. I don't know.
And my understanding is most bishops in the BYU wards themselves were just professors on campus or
Mhm.
something like that. Because I
Yeah.
know my bishop was, and I know my stake president was. My stake president actually was a physics professor where I took a physics
Oh.
class from. So
So your bishop that said, "Hey, I know of your situation," he was a BYU professor.
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
All roads lead to BYU in this
Yeah.
scenario.
at least it looks like it.
Yeah.
And this sounds, a lot like the second manifesto. It's kind of like, oh, we stopped doing that shocking on campus. Wink, wink.
Wink,
off
wink.
campus
Yeah.
and we'll send you there. We're not doing this at BYU. We're not
Yeah.
doing
Right.
it at
Technically,
BYU,
on paper.
but
Yeah.
we are doing it at BYU.
Yeah, well, it's slightly possible that this was just a collusion between bishops and
Yeah.
that BYU was not that heavily involved.
Yeah,
But
we can say that too.
Well,
We
you
don't know,
could, except for the
honestly.
fact that it was your counselor at
Right.
BYU who is
That's the
not
link.
in your church ecclesiastical line
Who's-
in any way.
right.
Yeah, that's
Who
an
came and got
academic
you and introduced
connection.
you to the program, and they threatened your scholarship,
Mhm.
Right.
which
Exactly.
I guess the bishop could
Yeah.
always say, I'll write you a letter saying you're gay and then you won't have a scholarship, but they're
Right.
the ones who introduced that idea to you.
Right. A
That's-
bishop would probably just threaten your membership, but this is a whole nother level with your academic
Right.
future being
Well,
threatened.
and let's face it, BYU bishops do work for BYU.
Yeah.
Whether they
Right.
work for BYU or not, they report to BYU,
They
and
do.
therefore they work for them. Whether
Yep.
Right.
in ecclesiastical sense, they work for the BYU because they're reporting, they're declaring whether you're worthy to be there.
Yeah.
They can take or give whatever they want.
They can send you to standards.
They can
If
send you wherever.
you
Yeah.
come and
Exact-
confess
right.
something, they can send you for
Yeah.
academic discipline.
Right.
Absolutely. Straight to standards. They're connected.
A-
So
and-
after telling your brother, was that a relief? Did you ever get any other therapy? I mean, it just seems like,
Well, I married, had a child, but was divorced within 3 years and never had a relationship other than that. So I think it kind of messed up my life.
I'm so sorry.
Or maybe my life was messed up to begin with and it didn't matter. But
No, I don't think you can have an event like that and not have it completely affect you. You think you can just put it behind you, and it can't. It's always there.
You're
So
right.
I am so sorry. We just
Yeah.
hear these stories over and over, and I just the collateral damage in the wake of this.
And I only had one
astronomical.
session. Imagine having 10 sessions of this.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really glad that we came across you because you're a wonderful person, and I've really enjoyed emailing and talking to you on the phone prior to this. And I'm really happy that you were brave enough to share your story, because it is something that I've never heard before.
Right.
And I think this is going to make a lot of people think. I think it's going to make a lot of people really angry. I don't even want to think about what's going in the chat right now. I can only imagine. And I wonder if there are others that had a similar experience that have never spoken about it, and they might recognize something in this and go, wow, I need to process what happened to myself too. Because sometimes you don't think about it till you hear someone else, and then you realize the impact.
I would like to hear from them because I want to know how much of my memory is accurate about the devices and what they look like, and their shocks and how painful they were and that kind of thing.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, like I said, I've been doing research in preparation for this interview, and pretty much everything you described about the apparatuses and the shock and the setting, even apologists like Fair Mormon, we're going to go through some of those slides later. That's how they describe it. Exactly what you said, only they describe it in more of a friendly way. Oh, it's a simple this and it's a little that,
Yeah.
But I feel like you really do remember. And of course, we understand with the trauma that, but I think you've been really good at saying, I don't remember this part, or I'm only speculating on this part. I think you've done a really good job on trying to be as accurate as possible 45 years later for an extremely traumatic event. But I do say that the things I've read, a lot of things back up everything that you've described. So we just really appreciate you, Ray. Do you have any final thoughts? I think our audience right now is just going, we love you, Ray, honestly. And we're just so sorry that this happened at BYU.
I think of it as a learning experience for me because it made me research what gays were like, because my 12-year-old brothers did turn out to be gay. And I became very open to that. I left the church. I became ex-Mormon. I was taught by that psychologist that it didn't matter whether I was gay or straight. It just mattered whether I had relationships, and that those relationships were consensual, and that And then I agree with all of that. And so I feel like made big progress from just that in and of itself.
No, that's an amazing way to look at it. And you're absolutely right, because I think there were a lot of ideas in that era that it was a little difficult to get over. And it sounds like you're a very loving person and a caring person, and what matters to you are people, like your family members. So
Right.
that's awesome. Well, Landon, do you have any final questions or thoughts? This has just been horrifying. I think when I watch this back, I'll see myself doing this the whole time. I was speechless half the time, and that's really saying something for me. So, Landon, do you have any final thoughts?
My thought on this is how scary this is, because this isn't someone who said, I'm gay and I'm seeking therapy.
Right.
This is them going to someone who says that they're straight or doesn't think they're gay and saying, you know, you need to come in for therapy. We think you're gay. And we read several of the accounts where they say, oh, it worked. This guy was gay, and after 10 sessions, he's now straight and with a woman. Well, what if he was straight the whole time and they just came and said, we think you're gay? And then he began to believe he was gay. And then when he gets married, he says, oh, they fixed me.
Straight.
Thank you, BYU, for thanking me. That to me is the scary part.
That's a good point, Landon. That's a really good point.
It is. I'm going to send this episode to Natasha. Natasha, you're going to die when you hear this. I'm sure she'll have some words. Any therapist, you know, is going to say this is so damaging sexually to anybody. That this is just incredible what they're doing. Oh my goodness. So, well, thank you, Ray. Thank you for sharing your story. And it's just so funny how we come across people. And I'm just so glad that you were so open and just so friendly and wonderful and willing to share this, because I do think it's extremely important. And I think that this might lead to some additional information or people sharing experiences, or, you know, just offer a perspective that I have not had before. I've heard about electroshock therapy. I've heard that people volunteered for the program. I felt horrible about those people, but this is a different level right here. It's very different. So,
well, thank you very much. I appreciate all that you two do, especially with your victory in Fairview.
Oh, yes. That's something, and there'll be more to come for that. So, but there are many other topics.
That works out for the
we do. There are many other topics in the post-Mormon world. So, and we're happy to bring all of them to you. So, all right, we'll say goodbye to Ray, and thank you again so much. Thank you so much, Ray. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that story was very difficult to hear, but we commend Ray on his bravery in telling it, don't we, Landon?
Absolutely. Yeah. Took a lot of courage to come forth and tell that.
It did take a lot of courage. And I think you can tell by our reactions to the story that we literally kind of had our mouths open going, I honestly can't believe this, especially that part at the end where he talked about his brother. That needs further looking into, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was
horrible.
It was horrible, but we thank you, Ray. You're amazing. We absolutely were so happy that we had the chance to get to know you, although under these circumstances, but we just really commend you on your bravery in telling this. So thank you for being on Mormonish. So, all right, we're going to just kind of go through a few more things at the end of this. So, as I said, there are different apologetic organizations. FAIR used to be called Fair Mormon. And now, of course, because that would be Fair Victory for Satan, it's called Fair Latter-day Saint. And they tend to be pretty uber apologetic. Isn't that how you kind of see them, Landon? They're really the ones that, protect with that sword there. So I thought it would be interesting, now that we've all heard what Ray had to say about his experience, to kind of compare his experience to Fair Latter-day Saints' take on the entire electroshock therapy scenario, because I found so many things about Ray's story that were different from the narrative that's out there. While they do admit it happened, their narrative so different from what we heard from Ray, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. This just shows that it was not as benign as they want you to think.
That's it. That's it exactly. So let's see what Fair Latter-day Saint says in comparison to Ray's story. So they have a section called Research Project on Aversion Therapy, where they provide some information to mostly faithful people who go there. They might have heard about electroshock and they want to find out what's really going on. So it's really funny, when I was making up the citation I just typed FL, Fair Latter-day Saint.
Yeah, I just was noticing
and
that.
I realized that's Fair LDS. So then I had to remember,
FLDS,
oh, no, FLDS. Yeah, they go by Fair. That's their little acronym, but their actual acronym is FLDS. Thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, so they say some church critics have made unsupported claims about the research and about President Oaks. Well, I think we kind of talked about in the beginning that these were not unsupported at all. He did make a statement and he was mistaken. Whether it was a lie or just a mistake, we don't know. The accompanying explainer provides thorough documentation showing why those claims are misleading and irresponsible. So now they're going to go through things one by one and try to explain why we, as critics, they're calling anybody that doesn't believe what they're saying a critic, why we got it wrong.
Yeah, well, they're calling them church critics. That
Yes.
all anyone here is saying is President Oaks was the president when this happened,
Right.
and that this practice did occur at BYU under his watch, including these police tactics to find people. And now we have an eyewitness account that completely contradicts someone who actually went through the therapy.
Yep, that's true. And we should say that there are the 14 gentlemen that were mentioned in one of our first slides. They also several of them have been pretty vocal about what's happening, but it is interesting that it said, as you pointed out, church critic, just by simply saying a president of the university should have been aware that something was happening. If you say that, you're a church critic. That's kind of funny.
Yeah. And the argument they're going to go on to make isn't that this didn't happen.
Right.
It's that there's no evidence that President Oaks had knowledge of the research.
Yes.
That's going to be the argument that they make.
Right.
So the counter argument is, should he have known that this was occurring?
Yeah.
And based on Ray's story, it sounds like everybody at the university knew about this, except President Oaks, if you want to believe that.
Yeah, we'll go into that for sure. Let's read this next one. What question are they trying to answer here?
Well, yeah, they're saying there is no evidence President Oaks had knowledge of the research during his time as president of BYU. Okay. BYU is a large university with many students conducting many research projects. There is no reason why Oaks would have known about the research and no evidence that he did know.
Okay, so you're right. That's their argument. Big university, tons of things going on. He couldn't be bothered with these kinds of things, and he would not know anything that was happening about the LGBTQ community because he had never spoken about them, because he had spoken about them over and over again, right?
It was his policy to rid the university of these people, including using the police force in order to do it. And yet he knew of no programs that were actively researching how to change these people at his university. They're right. There is no evidence that that I could show that he knew about it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And if it did happen, which, you know, it certainly makes common sense, then he must be lying about it if that's the case.
That's the thing. That's exactly it. Because you're right. This is his interest. It continues to be his interest. Recent updates to the general handbook on transgender members. People feel that is largely driven by Oaks, thinking that
Prop 8. He was involved in Prop 8. He was involved in the November 15th policy. Was part of the general part of the 12 at the time that was passed. A senior member of the 12. We've seen the trans policy recently that they've come out with. He is intimately for the proclamation to the family, which says it's only one man, one woman.
That's his baby.
This is his baby. And yet he didn't know about any of the research going on at the time. Yeah. Even while he's actively pursuing these people.
Yeah. It just kind of defies logic, honestly. And if we go to our next slide, I kind of called this fact check, because when you listen to Ray's story, so let's try to figure this out. President Oaks was president of BYU from 1971 to 1980. And this is the time period where Ray's story happened, 1979. In Ray's story alone, who else knew about the conversion therapy? Well, if you remember what he said, first of all, we have his BYU academic advisor. She knew. a home bishop knew, because, and that's who I'm assuming that it was. Wouldn't you assume the home bishop was
That's what he
probably,
assumed. He thought
that's
it
what
was
he
his home
assumed
bishop
too,
who made the
right?
call.
Right. So he knew that he needed to call BYU, get this on the radar, get something done. The BYU ward bishop, who is a BYU professor, absolutely knew, because he checked back with him. So did you have the treatment? You know, he was checking on him. He knew it was happening. An unidentified BYU psychology professor, and that would be the person that met him after class with the academic advisor. So there, and again, as we asked Ray, he couldn't name names. He didn't know, but it was a professor, and also a female therapist who was there off campus, and the admin that was trying to set up the appointments. At the very least, those were the people that knew about Ray's case, and I'm guessing many other cases, because they seem to know, you know, they seem to have a procedure of what was happening. It wasn't like Ray was probably the first and only.
Yeah, and this is, to me, this is just really disturbing, because one, the information is being shared. So anything about
Yes.
you know, that you can go to your bishop and confess something and he can't tell anybody. It looks like everybody's sharing the information about this kid who isn't even gay and hasn't even said that he did anything or that he had any feelings of being gay. And yet here they are, you know, sharing all of this information across the university.
Yep.
And when a BYU academic advisor threatens
Your scholarship.
your scholarship, that sounds like that's a policy of the university. And keep in mind, this was in 79. So this happened, you know, the aversion therapy, 14 people, happened in 76.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are 3 years later, and it's almost as if they took that research and said, oh, this is successful, we're going
Mm-hmm.
to use it on others now, and that this has become a policy of the university, and policies come from the leaders of the university, not from mid-level people.
That is such a good point that I don't think we've discussed before, about the fact that the academic advisor could not make that threat on her own. She couldn't on her own say, you have to do this. That had to be something that was up the chain, that she had permission. It was policy to do that. So I hadn't thought about that. You're absolutely right. So the question then is, does this type of network, what we just described, with those abilities to make decisions, to pull back scholarships, to give information to bishops, everything in that network and the transfer of information that we just discussed, does this operate without the president of the organization being aware? I would say no. I don't know for sure, but I would say no.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that bothers me is that, as Ray said, this was conducted off campus.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to hear people say, well, it wasn't part of BYU. This was off campus. BYU advisor threatened his scholarship, got him out of class, had another professor there with him. This was the administration which said you need to go off campus and do this. And I believe the aversion and the electroshock therapy also happened off campus.
Yeah,
which
for the
leads you
dissertation, yes, it
yeah,
did.
which leads you to believe that they knew that this would be a problem and said it must be done off campus, so it can't be traced back to us. That would be the indication, because why wouldn't you do it on campus if it's a school research project?
No, that's a good point. And I will say, I've said this before, but in my art program, in order to get a master's in drawing, you had to be able to draw the human nude form. There were no classes allowed where you could draw that on campus. So in order to satisfy that requirement, you would be sent off campus to a studio, I think it was down on Center Street, where you could do some nude figure drawing. So again, you got the degree from BYU. They knew they couldn't offer that, but they could send you somewhere else. They could outsource it. So they do that. And I'm sure there are other examples too.
And to say just that because it was done off campus, that BYU is not, heck, they arrested the guy off campus for the other thing, you know, so certainly there was university involvement in this story that Ray told.
Yep, I think so too. let's see. What does the next one say? Oh, okay. The research on aversion therapy was thoroughly mainstream at the time of Thorne's practice and McBride's study. So Fair is saying aversion therapy research was still being conducted by numerous secular and religious practicing psychologists and researchers and was still considered a mainstream treatment for unwanted sexual attraction leading to unwanted behavior. So they're basically trying to say everyone was doing it, aren't they, Landon?
Yeah, that's the argument they're trying to make here.
Yep, it is the argument. But as we know, and from this article, which was January of 1974, the title is 20 million?
20 million, yeah.
20 million gay people cured. And that's kind of a facetious title because what they're talking about is that psychiatrists finally drop the sick label, as this article says. So can you read that little print in the first sentence there, Landon?
In what may be the biggest gay news event of 1971, the American Psychiatric Association Board of Trustees voted December 15th without dissent to remove homosexuality from its list of mental disorders.
Yeah, and I think that was 73. I think that was 7. I know it's so tiny.
Yes, 73.
Yeah, 73. Sure. So anyway, the study was approved as a dissertation and the experiments began in 1976. This is several years after in, all medical journals, that idea of the LGBTQ community was no longer in vogue. But you're right. Other places, especially religious more organizations, were still, I think, having that mindset is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely, because they have to in order to protect their religious belief. Yep. It contradicts their religious belief. Therefore, religious belief overrides their psychological training, and they continue to practice that. So.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. All right, let's go to, and here's a little article about it. It says LGBTQ people have long protested these cruel and scientifically dubious forms of treatment, but the concept that homosexuality was a disease was accepted by the majority of the medical establishment. This included the American Psychiatric Association, which considered homosexuality to be a psychiatric disorder. But in the late 60s and 70s, a vocal gay rights movement took to the streets to demand equality. The profession began to turn its back on the concept that people could be converted to heterosexuality. In 1973, the APA removed homosexuality from the DSM. Its influential manual of psychiatric disorders, and medical professionals began to distance themselves from techniques that they had once embraced. So the medical field, says nope and starts to walk away. This wasn't the end of attempts to turn gay people straight. As LGBTQ visibility increased, self-proclaimed experts and faith-based groups took over the practice themselves. They called their technique conversion or reparative therapy, or advertised themselves as ex-gay ministries. Their methods varied and included everything from talk therapy to exorcisms. So that's what we're talking about. But again, is BYU a faith-based group? It is an accredited university.
Yeah, of course, many of the other evangelical universities are also accredited, but again, this is where religion runs up against science. And eventually science wins, but it takes...
Eventually, it takes a while, and there's a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah.
Ooh, what is this one about, Landon?
They say the electric shocks used in the aversion therapy were extremely weak and not at all dangerous. Subjects were shocked only on the arm or leg and never on the genitals. The study participants had control over the amplitude of the current and gave full informed consent to everything that happened. There are FDA-cleared devices purchased for voluntary use today that use far stronger shocks to treat pain.
Yeah, this is one of the worst ones. Does this sound like Ray's story? Voluntary and only on it just... Yeah.
They'll argue that he gave full consent because he agreed to go when they told him, hey, we're going to take your scholarship away from you. Oh, and by the way, we think you may be gay because your brothers, we think your brothers are gay, so we think you're gay. So you need to rush right down and get this before the gay gets to you. That's basically what they argued. And he's like, oh my gosh, my BYU advisor, these professors, they're telling me I need to go. So Terrified. He went. But then he didn't want to go, and they kept trying to get him to go, but he refused to go after that. So they're right, again, in that they want, this is the standard apologetics, that they were informed. I don't know if it was informed consent. He certainly
he didn't know what was
consented
going
to
to
it.
happen.
He had no idea what he was
Yeah.
going into when he went into it. So that's
Yeah.
not informed consent.
Mm-mm.
But I'm sure he probably signed some papers,
Yeah.
at the time. But he thought he was going to be treated for something that his advisors told him he needed because of
Right.
something that someone had told to a bishop or something back home.
Yep,
So,
and under complete duress, because
Yeah.
his whole life at BYU, his whole future was at stake. And he described it as painful. Here they're saying it was not painful. He described it as painful.
Yeah, and I'm sure that to say, well, it's not like we put him in the electric chair. Well,
Yeah.
no, you didn't. But the whole purpose of this was to make it uncomfortable enough that, the theory was, oh, if you get shocked every time you see something that arouses you, that would make you stop becoming aroused. The problem to me is that would seem to make it so that you would stop becoming aroused over anything, straight or
Yeah.
gay.
Yeah. Well, as he described, lifelong after effects and trauma and years of therapy.
Yeah.
And yes, that is exactly what happened. So it's extremely tragic. All right. Thorne's patients and McBride's research subjects were voluntary participants. This is what Fair Mormon is assuring everyone. Sorry, Fair Latter-day Saint is assuring everyone. Indeed, if they had been under duress, they would have tainted the results of the research. So McBride had no incentive to accept reluctant or unwilling patients. And again, we're talking about two, Fair Latter-day Saint is trying to describe McBride and his experiments. This is something different, which I don't know if anyone else has ever talked about anything like this before. But again, the idea that it's voluntary, exactly like you just described, Landon, there's nothing voluntary about it.
Yeah, when you threaten to take away somebody's scholarship. And he went to this location in 1979, not 1976 when McBride is doing his dissertation.
Right.
This is 3 years after, and there is a table set up. There is a video booth. They have porn and pictures of gay and lesbian and straight people having sex. And they're putting this isn't something they set up for one guy.
No.
This was something that seems to have been standard enough that the lady at the desk knew exactly what they were doing.
Admin.
There's a full-time researcher, professor, whatever the person was, administering this to them. This is larger than McBride's research.
It is. And who's running this? The dissertation is long over. The study
is McBride in charge of this?
Who's
is
running
Thorne in
this?
charge of this? And if Thorne is in charge of this, he's in charge of this as the head of the psychology department at BYU. Who does the head of a department report to? At some point they get to the president. They're very close to the president. I don't know if there's someone in between, but you can't not know this isn't going on if the head of your department is running this research off campus and you're at a religious school. And they just said, as part of their response, religious institutions continue to do this. So they're saying other religious schools did this. So those other religious schools must have had their president in the knowledge of doing it. If they're doing it, why wouldn't BYU's president know about it? They seem to know that everyone else is doing it. They just don't. It just seems that Oaks doesn't seem to know that anyone else is doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And who is running it? So organized, so off campus,
and who's funding
so connected. And
we asked him if he had to pay for it, and he said no.
No. So who's
somebody
paying the
is
salary
funding for this? Yeah. Is it BYU?
That is such a good question. Who's paying for the admin? Who's paying that salary?
Yeah, who are paying these people to do this?
Sorry, we're talking over each other because we're just now realizing it's so true. Like there has to be funding for this. It's a set up office. It's not a pop-up. There's an admin. There's a technician. There's a therapist type person. There's all kinds of equipment. Where did this come from? And why is it tied to someone's BYU scholarship?
It's problematic no matter what the setup was. You can say this was a private researcher doing his own thing, but somehow he had the administration's permission that anyone they identified would be sent to them, which is problematic just as problematic as if the school itself is doing it.
Yep, that's exactly right. So, and again, Fair LDS is just trying to talk, because I think they're only aware of the McBride study. I don't know if anyone is aware of this other stuff that was going on. I would love to hear in the comments if anybody's ever heard anyone else talk about this far later than the McBride study. So why don't you read this one, Landon?
The aversion therapy was not meant to change sexual orientation in the way we understand the term today. It was meant to help the patients control their desires and behavior. It is different from conversion therapy as the term is used today. This just seems downright dishonest, because the men that participated in McBride's study, you said that there's a documentary on it.
Yeah, some of them made a documentary. There's been a lot of articles written. Some have come out and talked about it. Absolutely.
And their intent was to become straight. Their intent was
voluntarily,
to be able to marry a woman and take her to the temple. That is conversion.
Yeah.
Aversion is simply to avoid the behavior. Conversion means to change the person. Yeah. And that is what they were trying to do. They were trying to get these people, because back in that time period, gay was not acceptable. You couldn't be gay and be a member of the church.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't act on it. Remember that timeline, that didn't change until much later.
Yep.
So their intent was to try to change them to become heterosexual, to marry heterosexual women, to have children, and to raise them in the church. That was the intent.
That's true. And if you look at what happened to Ray, I mean, he was accosted outside of his class and told, you could be gay. We have to fix this, right? You have to go do something about this. We have to assess you. And it's sort of implied there's something wrong with that, and you can lose everything if it's that. We can help you become something different, so you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it also leads you to wonder that the 14 people who participated in the program, why were they allowed to stay at BYU? If BYU knew they were gay when they put them into this program, why wouldn't they say, they said you can't be gay and be here. So they allowed them to be there. Why? They must have assumed they could change them.
The end result,
so that they could stay in the church.
Yep, that's exactly it. And that's what you also get from Ray's bishop, who checked with him and said, well, so did you get the, did you have the treatment, right? Checking on everything. Landon has a ghost in the machine, don't you? Yep, you're fine. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. I've got
okay, good. He's fixing the light. If you can switch slides, I can go to the next one while you fix it. Believe it or not, we sometimes have technical difficulties on Mormonish. I know you don't believe it. I think that you had some kind of a strobe effect. That,
it is.
Landon's planning a disco party later tonight, and he has a light going, and he's oh my gosh. All right. So I thought it'd be interesting just for a second to talk about the differences between aversion and conversion therapy. You kind of touched on this, Landon, and this picture to the right is something out of the Mark E. Peterson pamphlet on how to stop masturbating, because he definitely employed some of the techniques of aversion therapy. He said, if you feel like you want to masturbate, and this is Elder Mark E. Peterson, if you feel you want to masturbate, just picture a bowl of ice cream with some worms in it, right? Because the idea is, that you're not going to want to do it if you think of something disgusting. So, and that actually made it into the movie Ronald's Little Factory. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Landon, where he was actually eating worms.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So this says, the study mentions how aversion therapy was often connected to harmful practices like conversion therapy, which was a technique used to attempt to change the identity of LGBTQ individuals. Conversion therapy is not a real type of therapy and should not be practiced by any licensed therapist, counselor, social worker, or professional. The American Psychiatric Association, World Health Organization, American Psychological Association, and other significant organizations in psychology condemn the use of conversion therapy and note that homosexuality and transgender identity are not diseases, nor should they be cured or treated. Conversion therapy, according to a helpful report for the BBC in 2023, can involve lots of self-shaming, indoctrination, up to and including mental, emotional, and even physical abuse. And as I said, we've seen documentaries, there are books, we've heard podcasts. This is a real thing. This really happens. while aversion therapy is focused on getting a person to avoid a certain undesirable stimulus or some compulsive behaviors, like masturbation I just described. So-called lifestyle behaviors are more based on habit than inherent personality. It is usually not focused on causing a person to feel any discomfort toward their sexual orientation or gender identity. Specific forms of aversion therapy, namely electroshock aversion therapy, which used electrical shocks as an aversive stimulus, are banned in some parts of the United States and other countries. All forms of conversion therapy are outlawed in 16 countries, including Canada, Brazil, and Germany, as well as 20 states in the US. So there's that difference there, but aversion therapy is used as a part of conversion therapy often. And that's what we saw with Ray's story right there.
Absolutely.
All right. What about this one, Landon?
McBride's disclosure statement to the study participants explicitly disclaimed endorsement by BYU. All subjects signed and had witnessed a prepared statement explaining the experimental nature of the treatment procedure, the use of aversive electric shock, the showing of images that might be construed by subject as offensive, and that Brigham Young University was not endorsing the procedures used.
Okay.
I think
nothing to do with it.
What Ray indicated, they certainly were endorsing this therapy. He was not made aware of the images that he was going to be seeing.
Yep.
And if they want to say that he signed something, he didn't know what he was signing at the time. When he's being told you're going to lose your scholarship, sign this piece of paper and show up at this thing. He didn't know that he was going to be shocked when he showed up there. This all came as a surprise to him when he arrived there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and again, this could be correct about the McBride study because it did say they were voluntary participants. But as we're getting the sense here, this went on much longer with some kind of connection to the university. And in Ray's case, initially without any kind of consent. He didn't know what was happening.
Yep. So again, they keep going to the McBride study,
right?
Limiting it to the McBride study, where it appears that, from what Ray alleges, this is much more comprehensive than just the McBride study.
Yep. That's a huge takeaway from this podcast is anyone else aware that this continued on after that dissertation and that study? So BYU or the LDS Church's involvement in Ray's experience. Again, I just had to kind of write this out because I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. So he's told by a BYU professor that somebody needs to talk to him after an on-campus class. So I tried to highlight in red every touch point to BYU because there are so many. He is met by his BYU guidance counselor and a BYU psychology professor on BYU campus outside of his classroom. He's told that they are aware that his brothers were gay and that his BYU scholarship was in danger if he didn't participate in treatment. And it could be assumed it was an LDS homeward bishop who alerted BYU. I really can't think of any other scenario by which a person could contact administration, or I really can't think of what it could be. And then he's asked by his BYU bishop, also a BYU professor, if he has undergone the treatment. So in my mind, there are just too many touch points to not have BYU as sort of the starting point for this whole thing.
Yeah, I don't, from Ray's story, there's no doubt BYU is involved in this. BYU knew about it. What level of BYU, that's what, but boy, the top brass are very good at covering their tracks and making sure nobody knows what they knew. We've seen this many times in church history.
Yeah, we absolutely have. So hopefully maybe a viewer or listener might know more. Honestly, this might jog a memory or.
Remember, Elder Oaks had no idea about the SEC.
That's right.
Billions of dollars in the SEC, even though they signed off on it. It was just bad advice from lawyers. This was bad advice from professors. He knew nothing about it. This just seems to be, with Elder Oaks, this just seems to be an ongoing thing that we see, that he just gets involved in these things. They knew nothing about Prop 8. They didn't interfere in Prop 8. There was no money spent from Prop 8. We're told this over and over and over, and we see it come up over and over that they simply are not being truthful in
Yep.
what they knew.
No one is seeing around a corner, that's for sure.
No.
They can't see anything. It's like Hogan's Heroes. That'll date me, right? He always goes, I know nothing.
I know
see
nothing.
nothing.
Yes.
I know nothing. Yep. That's for you, RF. I'm probably the only other person that knows who Hogan's Heroes.
And even if you take out that he didn't know this, just the police involvement and the use of police to go and identify students off campus doing something that is perfectly legal, that is problematic in itself. This is the man who is going to be the next prophet for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And those are the tactics. And he's a former Utah Supreme Court justice who is the sponsor for LUPA and other things. And we've seen how he is behaving. This is not the behavior of a democratic society. This is police state. This is the RLUPA, and that's theocracy. We're in a theocratic police state, which is Iran. Who wants to live it? This is the people who are going to be in charge of this church. And that's quite a jump from what we just saw here today. But boy, you just see these tactics and you can't help but say,
you can't help but go there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. When you watch it, you see it. And I think a lot of us watch it. All right, let's move to our next slide. Okay, so now we're kind of back to our timeline. I told you we'd kind of update you as far as what's been happening since that time. So we have 2006, we have Soul Force Equity Ride stages die-ins at BYU to commemorate LGBTQ suicides. Protesters, including students, are arrested. So this happened way back in 2006. Probably a lot of us weren't even paying attention back then. Probably a lot of us were still active members, but people on campus were taking note, lives were being lost, and they were trying to stand up, and they were being arrested.
Yeah, in 2007, the Honor Code is updated to clarify that homosexual feelings are not a violation, but homosexual behavior and advocacy are.
Right, and I do remember that, the big push to say, it's all right, just don't act on it. That's what it was. Don't act on it. So you could still be a student, but I have a feeling that they were still watched very closely to make sure that they weren't going to act on it. I think that kind of still existed. So in 2010, BYU USGA is organized for the LGBTQ students. They are initially allowed to meet on campus and are later banned. So it kind of just goes in stops and starts as they try to organize, they try to support. Administration lets it happen for a little while, then pulls it back, slams it down. It just hard to get any traction, and mixed messages from the top, I think, as we see as we go through this timeline.
Yeah, in 2011, the homosexual advocacy ban is removed from the Honor Code.
Yeah, and that's it. In 2016, BYU football denied expansion into the Big 12 following protests by LGBTQ activist groups. Now, you remember this, don't you, Landon? You were following this pretty closely.
Yeah, and then in 2017, BYU hosts its first forums on LGBTQ issues.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come back to the football here in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So then in 2019, the Honor Code stories exposes sexual harassment, assault, homophobia, racism, etc. at BYU, sparking the Restore Honor protests on campus. So people are becoming much more vocal. There are other issues. It's that the LGBTQ community, it's women being assaulted and not listened to or believed. It's Title IX. A lot of stuff is starting to happen, and students are getting more comfortable being more vocal.
Yeah, and then February 2020, and this one's important. We remember in 2016, they weren't allowed into the Big 12 because of some of their policies. In February 2020, the homosexuality clause is quietly removed from the BYU Honor Code, suggesting that LGBTQ plus students will no longer be punished for dating, displays of affection, etc., which they then started dating and had displays of affection, and they were immediately disciplined for that. But the reason this is big is because they removed this. And why did they remove it? Well, they were soon in the Big 12, and they're now in the Big 12. This is their first year in the Big 12. And here they are they removed it, but they didn't really remove it.
Exactly. They removed the evidence of it. They removed the writing
So
of
no
it.
one could point to it and say you discriminate, even though they continue to do so. They just do it through the church and through the bishop and the worthiness interviews, as opposed to through the honor code at the school.
Yep. And that's why in March of 2020, the commissioner for the church education system clarifies that BYU's policy toward LGBTQ students has not actually changed. So again, top leadership not involved in any of this at all. We're going to give this mixed message from the top and take that verbiage out. There was even a professor on campus that made a video saying, thank goodness this has happened. And yes, you can date, you can, nope. And we'll show some pictures in a minute. So, and then what happened in March, Landon?
The COVID-19 pandemic shut down the school.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. There was momentum, there were protests, and then boom, it's over. So we all remember that. So, and I kind of made my own timeline to even take it a little bit farther than that and add a few other things just so you can keep up to speed. Back in April of 2019, we have the wonderful Matt Easton. There's a picture of him there. And he came out during his BYU graduation speech. And it was a beautiful speech. It was a moving speech. It got national attention and it was extremely encouraging, positive, and hopeful to many members of the LGBT community. And he's just an awesome person. So then, as we read in the last timeline in February 2020, a section titled Homosexual Behavior was quietly removed from the Brigham Young University's honor code. And you see the pictures there. People were so excited that they could show romantic affection. That was not allowed before. So you see in the picture on the bottom left, some girls went in front of the honor code office and kissed. Some people were kissing in front of the BYU statue. And very quickly, within a few weeks, as we said before in the timeline, the LDS Church, through the Commissioner of Education, Church Education, clarifies that even if the wording was removed, the standard remained the same. Now that threw everybody into complete panic. Am I in trouble? Can I be disciplined? What about this picture that we just took? People took to the campus again, protesting, because again, these mixed messages, you can't live like that. It's terrifying. Your education is on the line.
Again, complete police state.
Yep, exactly. Why don't you read this timeline? I added it going forward.
Fall of 2021, Elder Holland gave his famous musket fire talk to the faculty and staff.
Yep. And if you don't know what that was, it was a talk to staff and faculty. And it was about, our donors, they're a little concerned about what's going on here on campus. And, the old pioneers, they used to have a shovel in one hand and a musket in the other to defend as they were building. I think we need to hear a little more musket fire. It was a total dog whistle to everybody saying we need to shut down the LGBTQ community. And it was taken as a dog whistle. There were in the media, remember there were some scenarios where people actually, it was somebody like in a public office that actually said we need more musket fire against these guys. Desnot kind of took it and put it, it was scary. And even faithful Mormons stood up and said, no, this is too far. This is too far. A lot of people had a huge problem with that talk. It was extremely disappointing.
March 2021, Lighting of the Y by Bradley Talbot led that.
Yeah, and I remember, do you remember this, Landon? Like we were out with a group of people and we were hanging out in Provo. And I remember looking up there and we're like, what is that? And basically what he did is he just organized a bunch of people with flashlights to go stand on the Y and lit it up in the pride colors. It was absolutely a moving experience to everybody that looked up there. Of course, very quickly, BYU made it illegal to trespass on the Y, but then that was problematic too, because is it state land, county?
I think the BLM gave them permission to put the Y, but they were told they couldn't restrict access to that area, and then they restricted access.
They restricted it. They tried to put up fences, and there have been further Y lightings. They've done it in transgender colors, and it was just this big statement to try to show support. But I think BYU considered it. First of all, they put out an announcement that said we did not authorize this. Do you remember that? Said we do not at all. We did not do this. And then they just kind of made it illegal to go up there.
And I believe that the president of BYU did not know about the lighting of the Y.
Oh, yeah, of
to
course.
say.
No, thank you for
That
clarifying.
he probably
that,
didn't
Landon.
know
Yeah,
about, but
that
he
he
knows
didn't know
about it
about.
now,
Yeah.
and to
Okay.
act like he wouldn't. I wasn't the president when they lit the Y. That's
Yeah,
probably the next
exactly.
argument they're going to make. May 2022, Jillian Orr graduates from BYU with the rainbow flag. You see a
Yep.
picture of her there on the right with that.
Yeah, that made national news too. She just
Yep.
kind of opened her robe and there it was. It was amazing. So taking us to August of 2023, the honor code is updated and it now added back the language that explicitly prohibits staff and students from same-sex romantic behavior. So it does seem kind of suspicious, Landon, that they took it out just as they were trying to get into the
Big
Pac-12.
Then they
the
got
Big 12.
accepted, and now it's back.
And now
in.
it's back.
Yeah.
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 Just so there's no confusion. Just recently, in March of 2024, the Musket Talk was added to mandatory curriculum for incoming freshmen. They did amend it a little bit, but it's all still in there. That means that there's a class that freshmen have to take kind of about, I don't know, comportment at BYU or standards or rules or just what you can expect as a BYU student. The Musket Fire Talk is one of the talks they have to read. You can't make this up. I don't know how you can be that tone deaf. And just last week, there was an article in the Tribune about how Holland, the title was something like Holland offers apology for the Musket Talk. I read the article. It was not an apology. He said he wept at the pain of those who felt pain over the article. He never really said, I caused the pain. It's kind of like punching someone in the face and saying, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry this hurts you. I'm not sorry I'm doing it. I'm sorry you're feeling pain. It was a very strange way to word it. I didn't understand it. Did you?
No, I haven't understood a lot of things, President.
Are you giving up, Landon? You're just like, I can't do this anymore.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no. Anyway, it only gets weirder and it's really unfortunate, but that's where we stand. So as we end here, I wanted to draw everybody's attention to an amazing documentary. We have talked about this before. We have podcasted with the creators of this documentary. It's called A Long Way from Heaven. And now we attended the premiere last March and we're stunned to see that some clips from Mormonish, the episode that we described earlier with the 5 gentlemen, we were stunned to find those in the documentary, which was just, we were all crying. I'm crying. No, you're crying. We were there with one of the men, the wonderful Rob Lauer. I mean, it was just this moment, right? But it was shown once as a premiere and then it's kind of on the road at film festivals. It's here in Salt Lake. So for those of you that are in the area, A Long Way from Heaven is coming up at a film festival in Salt Lake City on Saturday, October 26th. So a little over a month from now, it's going to be at 12:45 p.m. I can show you on our next slide how you can get tickets. This is the Utah Queer Film Festival. And all you have to do is search that and you can choose this film. Again, it's going to be Saturday the 26th at 12:45. We've got our tickets and you can go see this amazing film. And it's a documentary about everything we just described. And I will tell you, it's interesting when we interviewed the creators, they said, we basically just wanted to start doing it about the lighting of the Y. We wanted to talk about that. And then just event after event started happening. And there was no stop. It was like a steamroller. So they just kept covering and covering all those events that we just went over on the timeline to kind of give you a sense of what's happening. So I think we have the trailer. Let's just play that really quick, Landon.
This has gone on too long. These kids are still facing such risk just to be out shining a light on a piece of rock.
You don't understand what's happening there. If we weren't there, I don't even know what would happen to these kids.
They're simply saying, please don't treat me like this anymore. That gets framed as hostile.
If you love an institution, it is your responsibility to make it better. If you love your family, are you gonna stay quiet as someone endures abuse?
And there it is. Yeah, this is something to be seen. I'm telling you, when we went to the premiere, that audience full of families, allies, I mean, it was incredible. There was not a dry eye left in that theater, was there, Landon? It was packed.
It was good documentary. Very well done.
Yep, it was very, very well done. So again, we encourage everybody, Google this. You can go We're going to be there. It's well worth seeing. And I'm hoping for those that can attend in person, eventually, as it goes through the film festival cycle, then it will be made available, hopefully maybe picked up by Hulu or Netflix or something, or somewhere available online so everybody can watch. So anyway, it's been a long podcast. It's been a really rough topic, but an important topic. Any last thoughts or takeaways, Landon?
No, I really don't. I just appreciate Ray and
Yeah.
his openness.
Yeah.
This just, what he told, just very scary, because now not only are we learning that it was gay students who were asked to do this, but oftentimes people who were just suspected of being gay that were also involved. So this goes many layers deeper than we ever thought.
Yep. I think you said it perfectly. That's exactly right. So please let us know in the comments. Have you ever heard of anything like this? Somebody being accosted and told their scholarship was in jeopardy unless they went off campus and engaged in something like this? We'd really like to dig deeper and find out if anyone else knows anything more about this era and what was happening. So please leave us a comment. Let us know. Send us an email at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com if you have anything to add to this or any further information, because I think it really needs to be looked into further. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. If you'd like to help financially support Mormonish Podcast, we have links in the show notes to Donor Box. We are a 501(c)(3), and we just absolutely just love those of you that are able to donate. And it means so much to us. We just love you guys. You're so awesome. We have links in the show notes to our merchandise, mugs, and all kinds of fun stuff. And again, a difficult episode to get through, but probably one of the more important ones that we've done. So thank you, everybody, for hanging in there with us. And we'll see you next time on Mormonish Podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.